Greetings in the name of Jesus Christ. I welcome everyone to a new episode of the Weekly Manna. Today's Weekly Manna is titled, Our Tomorrows Belong to God. We live in a world full of uncertainties. People around us, they walk their lives, live their lives in apprehension, not knowing what tomorrow is going to bring. There is nothing absolute. Everything around seems to be shifting. I know a lot of people who live their lives without clue, without confidence, just full of worries about tomorrow. Let me tell you a story. Once a GP rang a patient and said, "Would you come and see me?" So this patient visits the GP surgery and speaks to the GP. In the GP's office, examination room, the GP asks two questions. I have two news for you. One is a bad news and one is a worse news. Which one would you like to hear first? The patient's face became very worried and he said, "Let me go for the worse news first before I go to the bad news." So he asked the GP, "Would you tell me what the worst news is?" The GP said, "The worst news I have for you is that you would die in 24 hours. The recent blood tests and the examinations that you have had does highlight that you are critically ill and your illness is going to kill you within 24 hours. This is the worst news." This man, he started swearing, full of panic. He said, "I don't even have time to get my affairs in place. I do not know what to do," and so on. And after certain minutes, after his frustrations were out, he asked the GP, "Now I would think that it's time for me to hear what the bad news is." The GP said, "The bad news is that I should have told you this information yesterday. But what happened is that my GP surgery yesterday, the appointments were all full, and I didn't get an opportunity to give you a ring yesterday to tell you this news." See, sometimes we are like this gentleman, this patient who went to see the GP. We have no clue about what tomorrow is going to bring. But let me assure you, if you have the belief in God, you can be fully assured that our tomorrows belong to God. In the book of James, I would like to bring few verses to your attention. Chapter 4, verses 13, 14, and 15. Verse number 13 says, "Come on now, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit.'" So what's wrong in saying that tomorrow we would go to such and such a city, we will spend a year there, we will do some business and get some profit? What's wrong with that? See, I would like to title that verse as "The Boast of Tomorrow." In this particular verse, do you see the mention of God anywhere? You don't. What assurance is there that tomorrow we will be alive? We don't have any assurance. But this person plans something about tomorrow, making plans about going to such city, doing business, gaining profit, and so on. Bible tells us in Proverbs chapter 27 verses 1 as well, "Do not boast about tomorrow." We don't have to boast about tomorrow. There is a lovely parable told by Jesus. He talks about a rich person who was very productive in his business. We read that in Luke chapter 12 verses 17 onwards. Verses 16 onwards rather. This rich man who was very productive, he tells himself, "I have no place to store my crops in. I need to pull down my barns and I need to build larger ones. And I will store all my grain and my goods. And verse number 19 is an interesting verse. He says, I will say to my soul, soul, you may have many goods laid up for many years to come. Now what you should do? Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. That is what the rich man decided to tell himself. That's the time when God comes to the equation and says, but God said to him, you fool. He calls this man as fool. Even though he was rich, he was productive. He says, you are a fool. This very night, your soul is required of you. And now, who will own what you have prepared? See, this is what Jesus said. We should not boast about tomorrow. Our plans for tomorrow should have God in it. We should always have God into our plans about tomorrow. So when we come back to the book of James, chapter 4, verses 13, that was the boast about tomorrow. Now when we go to verse number 14, that is, yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just like a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. What is that? It talks about the reality of tomorrow. That verse talks about the reality. The writer of this epistle, James, he shocks people, bringing out that reality. Hey man, you are like a vapor. You might be seen today. After a few minutes or the next day, you're vanished. That is a reality. We are like a grass that withers away. We are like a flower that just fades away. What have you got to boast about? That is a reality about tomorrow. Now when we go to the next verse, verse number 15, it says, instead you ought to say, if God wills, we will live and also do this or that. That is the hope of tomorrow. What is the hope of tomorrow? I have a God with me who's going to help me face my tomorrows. And if that God wills, I will do such and such things. You give your tomorrows to God. Let me tell you, everybody who listens to me today, you might be somebody who is worried about tomorrow. Let me tell you, give your tomorrows to God. He's somebody who can hold your tomorrow and lead you amazingly. Don't worry about your tomorrows. Give your tomorrows unto God. He will lead you into a brighter future. God bless.